Welcome back. I always look forward to my time with you. This is Menopause University, where you learn everything you need to know in order to successfully manage your menopause your way. As your teacher, I try my best to make sure I address absolutely everything that can get in your way of successfully managing your menopause your way. And one of the things that can really throw you off is terms that are meaningless. Or sometimes they aren't exactly meaningless. They just don't mean what you would expect them to mean. Or they're misleading in some way. Occasionally they're ambiguous, and at times they're complete oxymorons. So as we embark on our breast cancer unit, it's important to discuss these terms, because when it comes to the topic of breast cancer, there are more confusing, misleading, ambiguous, and oxymoronic terms than there are with any other disease. So today I'll bring your attention to some of the quirky terms that set the stage for all sorts of other quirky things that we'll be discussing later in this breast cancer unit. One of the things I love about making these YouTube videos for you is that I can target issues that are not in my book. With these videos, you get all sorts of extras, and this is one of them. Now, last week I presented the benign breast diseases, and you were probably shocked to discover that the in situ diseases are benign diseases. That's due to a variety of reasons, one of which is the terms used to label them. So we'll be addressing that and more here today. Take a look at the terms we'll dissect and discuss today. Pre, atypical, potential, subclinical, not yet, and in situ. Notice that these terms imply what I like to call almost disease states. This is because most diseases don't just pop up overnight. Most diseases, and definitely all cancers, develop over time. You've seen this phenomenon of pathology that I call the not yet full-blown disease in our units on heart attack, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's. For heart attack, it's plaque buildup that has not yet progressed to the stage of completely blocking the arteries to your heart or ultimately causing a heart attack. For osteoporosis, it's osteopenia, which is bone loss, but not yet severe enough to qualify as osteoporosis. For Alzheimer's, it's mild cognitive impairment, which later becomes Alzheimer's. You've even seen it with diabetes. It's called pre-diabetes. So what about cancers? For every cancer, there is a continuum. At one end of the continuum, you are completely well. At the other end of the continuum, you have full-blown cancer. But there's a whole lot in between. And all these terms refer to that time in between, when you are on the road to developing the cancer but have not arrived at the actual full-blown cancer state. So these are not yet cancer terms. If we were to draw such a continuum for cancer, it would look like this. What you see here is a timeline. It represents the continuum of disease progression over time. At the far left, you see the green portion labeled as perfect health. If I add the perfect health label to our familiar demonstration board, it would end up here in the normal zone. And I'll go ahead and add both perfect health and normal here. Over time, things could just stay that way. If so, the continuum ends there. Or the disease can progress to become pre-cancer. in the yellow zone. You learned in all the cancer units preceding this one that pre-cancer is also called atypia. It's not cancer. It may never become cancer. It just has the potential to become cancer. On our board, that would go here. Next, you see an orange zone with multiple labels: potential cancer, subclinical cancer, not yet cancer, and in situ diseases. These are all situations in which there are some individual cancer cells, but they have not yet behaved like cancer cells. In other words, by definition, cancer is an entity that spreads to invade surrounding anatomy. In the unit on cancer in general, I taught you the term neoplasia. You learned that neoplasia is cancer at the cellular level or microscopic level, but is not the same thing as cancer at the macroscopic level. So at this point in the continuum, even though individual cells constitute cancer, the cancer has not behaved like a cancer. It has remained localized to its original location. And it may just stay that way forever, never becoming true cancer. On our board, that would be here, and all these different labels. So that we would have here, and here, and here, and here. The final red zone is actual cancer. The cardinal feature of cancer is that it invades surrounding tissues. That's what makes it a cancer. That's what makes it malignant. That's what distinguishes its behavior from that of other diseases that are not cancers. So finally, we'll put our label for cancer on our board in its appropriate location, way down here. So this continuum shows you that not every entity that has the potential for becoming cancer actually becomes cancer. In many cases, it stays in one of these not yet cancer states. Now, if you do a screening test and discover one of these not yet cancer states, what do you do about it? That would entail any of these entities here above the level of cancer. So everything from here and above. Well, you usually treat it, but would you treat it as the not yet cancer state it is? Or would you treat it as the cancer it has not become? This is an absolutely critical question because this is an area that has caused all manner of mess in the world of breast cancer. In the unit on cancer in general, you learned a whole host of other terms to describe this progression of cellular changes on our board. If we were to add some of the terms you learned way back then to this continuum, we'd get this. Now you see that I've added the terms normal cells, hyperplasia, atypical hyperplasia, dysplasia, neoplasia, and cancer in their appropriate locations on the continuum. So now the green zone corresponds with normal cells and hyperplasia. And the yellow zone corresponds with atypical hyperplasia. The orange zone corresponds with dysplasia. I can find a place to put that. Hovering between dysplasia and cancer is neoplasia. And finally, the last red zone is cancer. Now, if I add to our continuum the different degrees of breast diseases using the terms you used last week for the benign breast diseases, you get this. Due to space constraints, I had to create more than one line of text, so I just added them in stair-step fashion. So now you see that normal is still normal. Proliferative diseases without atypia corresponds to hyperplasia. Proliferative diseases with atypia corresponds to both atypical hyperplasia and dysplasia. In situ diseases correspond to both dysplasia and neoplasia. And of course, cancer is still cancer. But I added the word invasive because you've learned that in order for an entity to be cancer, it has to have invaded surrounding anatomy. So, if we add our labels from today to our demonstration board for the different degrees and steps of cellular change towards cancer, we have normal or perfect health in green here, and we have proliferative without atypia falling into this zone for hyperplasia, and then we have proliferative with atypia falling into the orange zone for dysplasia and atypia, both of those. And we have the in situ diseases also falling into this orange zone. And it corresponds or coincides with potential cancer, subclinical cancer, not yet cancer, and neoplasia. And let's use a snail to represent this category that is not yet cancer and may or may not ever become cancer. And a snail is representative because a snail creeps along very slowly or may just hide in its shell and go nowhere, just like these not yet cancers. And finally, there's invasive cancer, all by itself, in the red zone for true cancer. In other words, none of these terms mean cancer before you get to invasive cancer. And let's use a crab to represent invasive cancer because, as you learned long ago in the Cancer in General unit, the word cancer actually comes from the word crab, and this crab looks really mean and invasive. So let's just put him right there. Now, let's stop and reflect on some of the things you've learned in the units on endometrial uterine cancer and cervical cancer with regard to these same terms. Take the term atypical hyperplasia. In the endometrial uterine cancer unit, you saw that atypical hyperplasia is treated by having a total hysterectomy. One and done. Once you have the total hysterectomy, that's the end of the story. No need to do anything else based on the fact that you had atypical hyperplasia in your uterus at one time. You just go on with your life as you please. Nothing about having had atypical hyperplasia affects your menopause management in any way. Then, in the cervical cancer unit, you discovered that you treat cervical dysplasia by destroying the transition zone of your cervix with freezing, burning, or excising a cone-shaped piece of tissue from your cervix. That's it. One and done. After that, you just move on with your life, and that's the end of the story. Nothing about having had cervical dysplasia affects your menopause management in any way. So treatment of all entities on the continuum that are not yet cancers is different from treatment of cancer itself. And that makes perfect sense. They haven't demonstrated anything to qualify them as cancers. Well, the reason I presented this video is that such is not the case when it comes to breast cancer. With breast cancer, this continuum is the same, but the manner of addressing every stage is a complete conundrum. I call it the breast disease continuum conundrum. Despite the fact that these terms implying not yet cancer states are very clear in their designations as non-cancers, with breast cancer, people tend to treat them entirely differently. And the reasons for that are not logical. This is why you probably got the quiz question wrong last week. There is a complete misapplication of all the words on this continuum for breast cancer, and breast cancer only. And I want you to see those differences. So the entire world of breast cancer is one of conundrums, twists, and turns that really cause a lot of confusion. Most are generated by hype and fear. And I want to be sure you know that there's a huge divide in how these entities are managed for other cancers versus how they are managed for breast cancer. I'll leave it to you to decide if you think it's logical. So we'll be taking this a step further in the next video. Heck, you already know that. Here at Menopause University, every subsequent video takes things a step further. So the summary for today is this. The continuum of not yet cancer states are the same for breast precancer as they are for other precancers. However, their terms, meanings, and manner of management are completely different for breast precancer than they are for other precancers. This difference is not based on science or logic. It is based on hype and fear. That sets the stage for our next video, which will be on carcinoma in situ of the breast. I'm sure most of you have heard that label, but you've never heard the truth about it. And you know that I always tell you the whole truth and the whole story. So be sure to come back for that video. I'll tell you goodbye from now, but between now and the next time I see you, I hope you go to menopausetailor.me and schedule a consultation. Subscribe to both my newsletter and my channel, and follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Stories, Twitter, you name it. Bye!